You're listening to the Nikhil Hogan Show, Episode 6. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Nikhil Hogan Show. This is Episode 6, and we are so happy to have Christopher Vuk. He is a violinist, and he's also a business owner. He is the owner of the incredibly successful rock and roll Daycare in Massachusetts. He's an alumni of the Longy School of Music, and he's a graduate of Berklee College of Music. And he started also the School of Groove in 2007 and opened up his first rock and roll daycare in 2012 with a very popular music program, which we'll talk about in a minute. And Chris, how many centers do you have right now?
So we currently have 4 centers in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we're working on opening another 3 centers in the next 6 months.
Wow. Now, I guess from one musician to another, why daycares?
Well, for us, I was touring back in 2011, and my wife and I were expecting our first child. And we'd been running the School of Groove. I'd been touring with my string quartet, the Boston String Quartet, and I happened to stay with a woman. My family stayed at her home in Zionsville, Indiana. And I recall she lived in a mansion on a lake, a private lake that she owned. And I asked her, I said, "What do you do?" And she said, "Well, I am in the daycare business." And growing up in northeastern Iowa, I didn't see the daycare business as a very lucrative business. That, right? Nobody would think about that, yeah. And so when I saw this lady in her house in the lake, I thought, boy, there's something to this here. And she took my string quartet out and my family out a couple days later, and we went to a steakhouse where the steaks were about $100 a head. She brought her whole family. There's maybe 15 of us, and she threw down a couple $1,000s without batting an eye for dinner. And I really thought there's something I need to learn here.
Now,
so I asked her about daycare, and she told us her story, and it sounded pretty interesting to us. So we just filed it away. Came back to Boston some weeks later, and we were looking for what we were going to be doing next and where we were going to enroll our daughter in daycare because we needed a plan for her. And when we started looking at the prices of daycare in Cambridge, we thought, my gosh, it's so expensive.
Cambridge, Massachusetts in general is quite an expensive place. One of the most expensive states, I think, in terms of real estate and in a lot of ways.
Now, and Cambridge is one of, or if not the most expensive city in America for childcare.
Yikes. Okay.
So when we saw that, we thought, there's no way we can afford this, but maybe we could build one. So we took a giant leap of faith, and we opened up 2 classrooms in June of 2012 for, I think we had 7 infants and 6 toddlers. And we had no idea what we were doing, except we knew how to teach music.
Right.
And that's what we did. And we kind of struggled our way through the first 6 months, making many, many mistakes. But we found that parents really responded well to a program that offered music every day.
I can hear some music right now. I guess that daycare is just filled with music like all day, really.
All day. Yes.
and that's a big hit with the parents. The parents love that, right? I mean, it's especially, how do you think that focus, now it's the rock and roll daycare, right? So there's a huge emphasis on music. So when parents come in, what do they expect out of the music program?
Well, I think parents, especially for children this age, most of our parents are first-time parents. And as any first-time parent, it's a time where there's, I'd say, mass amounts of confusion, having gone through it myself, 4 children.
Wow.
And I think that parents don't necessarily know what they're looking for. I think most people recognize music as to be a beneficial learning device.
Absolutely.
I don't believe that a lot of parents see music as just a beautiful thing for music's sake or art's sake. I think it becomes a novelty in that regard, but there is there is the desire that parents have because of the inherent benefits of music. And at Rock and Roll Daycare, we're trying to achieve both. We want children to learn music theory and to achieve competence in an instrument or with their voice or in language, so that they are able to experience those benefits of musical learning. However, for us, it goes a lot deeper than that. I really believe that music is good for the soul, and I think that it creates better people.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
the real power that we're able to offer the children here.
I wonder, how does your training, because you're actually a full-fledged musician, you went to Longy, that's a conservatory, right?
That's right.
And you also went to a contemporary school, Berkeley. So really, you have both the classical and the jazz sides to your education. How did you? Now there must be. I'm not quite sure of how typically music is added into daycares, but you must have had a unique perspective, especially. When did you start playing the violin?
I started when I was 6.
So that's pretty young. That's pretty young for 6, and it was classical training. And how did that influence your childhood?
Well, for me, my mom made me do it. I'm certainly glad she did, but I don't think I was terribly interested in it. I remember daydreaming a lot, practicing staring out the window.
Right, right.
But my mother was a really good force in making me consistent in practicing the instrument and practicing with me when I would not. And I think one of the great things I developed in that was the ability to commit to something.
Yeah.
And to really having consistency in a project and see it through to completion. I didn't get introduced to alternative styles of violin playing until I was well into my teen years, but that was a pretty transformative time for me. I recall going to Mark O'Connor, who's a
yeah, we got to talk about that. Mark O'Connor, he got that big controversy with the fighting with the Suzuki people. I don't know if you read about that. A few, but he is an amazing, amazing musician. He's a great guitar player.
He's a very talented man.
So did you meet Mark O'Connor?
I've met him a couple times. Yeah, when I was 15, I think it was, I went to a summer camp out in San Diego, California, and he brought in violinists from about 10 different styles of music. We had Latin violin,
Wow.
We had rock and roll violin, Chinese,
Right.
of course bluegrass and jazz and standard stuff like that, Cape Breton style. And for me, it was the first time that I'd seen the violin as a multi-dimensional instrument. I'd always thought that violin was Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, and
Right.
maybe
You don't usually see violin out of these settings, but actually the violin is, and you can speak to that, Chris. I actually should reveal to the audience, I know Chris quite well. We're good friends. And Chris, you've actually done a lot of recordings for your string quartet, but you've also done recordings for other things, is that for a film and some other kind of work as well, where where a string ensemble is required for perhaps like television or movies or?
Yeah, we've experimented in so many different genres, and one of the things we used to do is we would pick a style every Christmas and we would tour just playing a certain style, if it was Latin or Arabic or Celtic music, and that was a big hit. But yeah, we recorded on. I'm not a watcher of the show, but the originals, the Vampire on CW. We were on that. We did some stuff years ago with John Mayer. We recorded with a contemporary classical label. We've done some residencies at different universities. We've been on some different movies. We went and played at the Los Angeles Music Awards, did some rock and roll. Yeah, I love experimenting. For me, that's the thing that gives me greatest delight. And I think for the children, I really want them to see possibility and wonder about what is possible in music that they can do. I don't necessarily care if they're playing the violin or the piano or guitar, but that they can see that there's so many exciting things that they can experience in music and try that.
That's amazing, because when you talk about the violin having so much application outside of just traditional classical music, that's really, I think most people, children as well, they tend to have preconceived notions of certain instruments in certain settings, but music, you find unbelievably unique orchestration for all sorts of things. You could find like the flute, for instance. I recently interviewed a flute player, and the flute is pretty much everywhere. Nobody really knows where it shows up. It's used in almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
So Chris, talk a little bit about the early. I'm very curious about the early music education program that you have. It's really quite big, right? I mean, daycare is a really an exciting market, and parents are really looking for something unique, and they're looking for. It's gone really just beyond just taking care of a kid for a certain amount of time, right? Daycare is really, you're providing a really excellent service. You're adding a really content-rich experience for the child.
Yeah. Well, I think what we've experimented with a lot of things, and that's something I love to do. And some things work, and some things do not. Something that we started doing about 2.5 years ago is we started experimenting with teaching children about different cultures in a very organized fashion. We called it the Cultural Currents curriculum. And what we did is we would select a country and study it for 2 months. And during that process, we'd introduce different artifacts from the country. We would introduce some different songs, dance, and material from the country. And then it would culminate or finish in a performance. We would invite a local group. It might be students, it might be a professional group, dance or music typically, and they would perform for the children in what we called the International Night. This was a great hit. Parents loved it. It was a great community building, and we saw children were very excited to learn and essentially travel around the world learning about the different countries. So we wanted to develop this further into something that could also engage families back home, because we might be studying China for a couple months, and parents were not entirely sure what their children were doing at school because we were changing the curriculum frequently, and they wanted to be a part of it. So we created the Montessori Music Lab about 2 years ago, and this company was designed to create physical curriculum or books that could be used in school and also in the home. So what we have done is we create illustrated songbooks of 4 songs from each country that we study. We have a great illustrator down in Mexico City who does this work, Gabriel Chacon, and she illustrates 4 of the songs that we pick for, say, Mexico or China, or countries that we did recently. And then we also provide simplified sheet music for the children to use. It's designed for a diatonic bell set.
Right.
That the children can play on.
I have a question about how much the kids can absorb at a young age, and I'm very curious about Montessori and the methods used, because that's very, very popular, Montessori. Even in Singapore, there are a ton of Montessori schools as well. Could you actually explain what does Montessori mean actually? What does that mean for non-musicians or for people who are not familiar with early childhood care?
Yeah. Well, Maria Montessori was a very complicated person.
In what way?
She was very diverse in her study. She was a mother. She was a scientist. She was a educator. She was a pioneer for women. She really advanced the field of education in such a way that we're validating the results of her research decades after her death. What she did that was very remarkable in her days is she applied the scientific method of study to the observation of early childhood education. So she would, simply put, she would observe children and design responses depending upon what the children were doing.
Mm.
Now, this was a revolutionary concept because back then, and really, I would say still, in the majority of schools, we would consider education to be teacher-centric. And this is a model in which the teacher is the leader, the teacher is preparing material to be taught, to be verbally given to a child, or in a setting that it would be presented. Everyone gets the same material. Everyone's coloring the same picture of a fox or doing the same art activity, and the teacher is guiding and directing all of the steps. What Montessori realized is that she believed children didn't want to do that. That children wanted to do what they want to do.
I like that. I like that philosophy a lot.
For those of you that are listening, if you got kids, you know that if your child wants to do something, they're going to do it. You might not see it, or you might not like it, but they're going to do it in some way, manner, or fashion. You can either help them or you can try to stop them, but they're probably going to do it. And what she realized is that empowering the child to do what they wanted to do was a way to achieve great results for children. So Montessori came to fame very quickly because she wanted to try her educational models in Italy. And I don't think really anybody believed that it would work. So they gave her a classroom full of children with significant mental and physical disabilities. And after working with those children for a period of time, they took the same kind of tests that the children in, I guess you can call them the normal schools, were taking, and they beat them.
No kidding.
And this caused quite a stir. And it really propelled Montessori to a level of fame worldwide as she displayed this time after time with country after country. And I think what's really amazing about the Montessori philosophy is it said you can do Montessori with sticks and stones, and that it's all about preparing an environment in which a child can thrive based upon the interest of that child.
That's really interesting, Chris. I'm also wondering, how familiar are you with, because it seems Italy has a lot of models of early childhood education. Have you heard of that Reggio Emilia? What is that?
Yeah, Reggio Emilia is a place, and I can't pronounce the name of the supposed founder.
Okay.
But the Reggio Emilia philosophy is really based in the community of Reggio Emilia, and yes, there are many similarities to the Montessori philosophy. It is very child-led. It is focused on peace education.
But they are different, right? They are different.
There's a significant focus on art in the classroom. Not that that's ignored in Montessori, but there's a very, very heavy focus in Reggio schools. And in some Reggio schools, there are actual classrooms that are just dedicated to art exploration.
I see.
Incredible. And there's a larger community aspect. So Montessori is very much designed about the individual and the needs of the child. Follow the child is if you could sum up Montessori in 3 words, it'd be follow the child.
I see.
Reggio is more communal, so it's group based. A lot of the art activities are group based. There is a lot of engagement with the community. Reggio Emilia, I have not visited personally, but it's based out of the community school system. It wasn't a program designed for a special group of tuition-paying families. It was designed for the community, and so there's a very special mark that has on the Reggio Emilia philosophy.
I have a question about early music models, because when I was in Berkeley, I did music therapy, and there's some overlap with music ed, and there's mentions of stuff like Kodali and Orff. And what do you make of all these models of teaching music to very young kids?
I've learned more, and as we've evolved, I think we're trying to achieve the same thing. And I think in many regards, we're doing it in a very similar way.
Organically, they all lead in a certain direction.
Yeah, I think if you look at Orff and Kodai, they were trying to achieve the same thing, and their goal was to expose children to music through folk music. Folk music being defined as the music that represents a specific culture and the ways and the instruments and the methods, rhythmic systems of a specific culture. And of course, Orff and Kodai lived. In the early 20th century, so they had far less access to the wide array of musical.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Yeah, yeah, that's right. I imagine now in the 21st century, kids have so like with the internet as well. Just the range of musical options available is stunning.
It is, and if you look at the Orff method, it is largely in Kodai. Kodai is more Eastern European influence because he was from Budapest, Hungary. But with Orff as well, you see a lot of North American influence, a lot of European influence, and it doesn't go much beyond that. They did an incredible job of codifying folk music that has really defined a significant amount of the musical learning which has happened in the Western Hemisphere. But I feel that what we have latched onto here at Rock and Roll and Montessori Music Lab is that I feel that we are descendants of the Orff and Kodai methods, and what we're trying to achieve
Like
is
a modern interpretation, a modern 21st century meeting the needs of the modern child.
yeah, and I think the way we're able to do that and to expand their vision is I can create material about countries that they didn't even know existed.
Right.
We studied the country of Gambia in West Africa a couple of months
Well,
ago.
African music is great. The rhythms, everything, fantastic,
Yeah,
fantastic.
and we were fortunate to have a member of our community whose grandmother lived in Gambia, and so we connected with them, and they sang us songs from their childhood, and we wrote them down just like an ethnomusicologist would do.
That's awesome.
In the bush. And we wrote down the songs, and we transcribed them, we translated them into English, and we created curriculum around it. And we do this for every country that we study. That was an example of
That's
significant
fantastic. That's
work.
fantastic.
But we're able to expand the envelope of what Orff and Kodai could have ever imagined in going into different reaches of the world that they never heard of. Northern Russia, where there's villages that are only accessible by helicopter or snowmobile. I mean, we can access those populations now and bring that music into the hands of children around the world. And I think it's an incredible thing to do. I think the concept is the same. We're learning and exciting children through folk music, and we're doing it through a game. We're doing it through repetition, and we're doing it through learning different languages. So our children have studied and sung and performed to date in 14 different languages, which I think is incredible. And we'll continue to do new languages. They're studying Spanish this month, and then we're going to go to India in May, and we'll go down to South
That's
Africa.
really exciting. Chris, let me ask you, now you have a lot of experience now working with kids and implementing this music program. What doesn't work? What doesn't work when it comes to young children and music?
Inconsistency doesn't work. We ran a private lesson program for about a year and a half, and I was excited at the opportunity to give children ages 3, 4, and 5 years old access to private music lessons.
Right.
As I mentioned, I started when I was 6. I started my daughter when she was 2, and
It sounds like a ball. It's having a good time.
I think they're shaking some sillies out over there. But I really appreciate the level of learning that children are able to access in those years before 6. Not that the learning is done, but most of a child's personality is formed by the time they're 6 years old. And if we can get them to access music in those years, boy, oh boy, we have a great power. So,
So wait a second. What does that mean? So you're saying what forms at 6?
personality.
Oh, really?
Yep. I think it's 90% of your personality is formed by age 6, is what current research is claiming.
Wow. Oh, no. This is
Kind of
this
frightened.
you hear that's really fascinating. So the inconsistency of not having those lessons week in and week out, is that right? What is the ideal regularity for music lessons?
Well, I'd say every day. It's not practical to think that way, but
Yeah,
what
yeah,
we found though, it wasn't the problem with the lessons. It was the problem with in between the lessons. So most people aren't going to enroll their child in lessons 2, 3, 4 times a week. That's a lot of money and it's a lot of time and impractical. But for it to really be effective, and I'd say especially at these formative years, is that kids have to practice. And I'd
yeah,
say practice 7 days a week. You could probably get away with a little bit less than that, but you can't. A child is not going to learn music if they're taking a lesson once a week. They will not learn it. I have proven
yeah.
that, and I was at work.
I
But
know that too. Yeah, they have to have music all the time. They have to be playing, experimenting, having a good time. It can't just be have their practice with their tutor once a week. That's the practice time. No, that's not going to work.
yeah, I think we've tried it, and music schools around the world have tried that, and could say a resounding no. It is unsuccessful to do this. You gotta get buy-in. So that's something we've really put a lot of effort into, is getting our parents to buy in that it's not only good for their kid, but I also go far enough, and I'm writing a book about this now, that it's good for your family. That the
Yeah.
best way that you can do music as a non-musician, or heck, as a musician, is to learn with your kid. If you're a parent with a
Oh,
child,
wow.
learn with your kid. And you don't need to know more than them. You just need to facilitate time to learn with them. And I think the results can be beautiful. I do this every day with my children. And of course, I am a musician.
Yeah.
But I feel it's one of the most powerful and beautiful times of our day, just to get away from education and all these academic ideas. It's a beautiful time to spend with your family, and I try never to miss that time, because that's the best connection time that I have with my kids as a group, singing songs, dancing, having fun. It's just great to be able
That's a
to.
good segue. You mentioned singing. Now, for instance, the guitar is very difficult to fret, or maybe even the violin to fret at a young age. But singing, a kid can do it almost instantly from the beginning. They can use their voice, and I guess the drums, right? So, what if you could prioritize instruments in terms of ease of use for a young child? What are the main instruments that you find in early childhood education for music?
Yeah. Well, children are naturally vocalizing, um, so that's might be criticized for saying this, but I'd say that's kind of a default. The children are going to
Right.
sing. Every
Yeah,
child
yeah.
sings.
The first instrument is the voice.
Yeah. I think the most accessible instruments, though, from what we've seen, and I think experimentation in other schools has showed, is violin, drums, guitar, and piano. Wind instruments are not very accessible due to the limited lung capacity of the child.
Mm.
Um,
Okay, that's interesting.
are definitely accessible. We've seen success in children learning those instruments at 3, 4 years old.
How complicated can the music be for a child to get? I mean, we all know children's songs are relatively simple, speaking, so to speak. But how like can a child appreciate difficult music at a young age?
Well, these are different questions here. If you appreciate, and what they can appreciate as compared to what they can do.
Or maybe like yeah. Do you think they respond well to complexity, or does the music necessarily need to be have a certain amount of simplicity,
Well, I think the
something to
question is
latch
less to
onto?
do with music, and it's more to do with the nature of the child. And the nature of the child is to expand, to develop more neural pathways. That's what I
Right, right.
really want to do. And so, if a child has achieved something, they want to go to the next level. It's got really very little to do with music. If they can do a diatonic scale, upwards, backwards, um, solfege, they they want the next level of difficulty. So they want chromatics, they want their sharps, they want their flats.
Right.
They expand to the higher octave or a lower octave. And we have kids that we do with a lot with our bell sets, or how we introduce music theory. And we have chromatic bell sets, so we have 12 bells in an octave.
Wow, 12. Normally you just get the white keys.
Yeah. So we have children that are learning C sharp and G flat.
Right. You normally get, more normally in music, these kind of music settings, you get all the safe white keys, You can get, so that's interesting, a chromatic bell set. So you would need some pretty competent teachers, right, to execute these
Yes
kinds of
and no.
programs, right?
So teaching music theory to a level of complexity, yes. And I do believe, I believe I don't know the answer to how difficult music children can comprehend. We have some children that can do some pretty complicated rhythms and pitches, but
Right.
I think they can probably do more if given the chance and opportunity. I think in response to oh dear, I'm losing my train of thought here. What?
So we're talking about complexity and children, maybe you could say appreciating, or maybe getting something out of it, or understanding. Yeah, I think maybe the main thing is understanding complexity in music. Do you think like, well, would you play Bartok for a child, or or something like 20th century music? Would they get it, or would they start to get restless and want something a little bit more accessible?
Well, that's a hard question. I think who gets contemporary music?
I don't think most adults get
I love humanity into that.
Yeah.
I think.
Never mind children. Yeah.
Well, I think you could look at modern art in the same way. I enjoy art museums quite a bit, and I was in Paris with my children a couple months ago, and we went to a couple art museums, and I found it just a really interesting process to stand in front of some modern art and ask my kids what they thought. They were 3 and 5 at the time.
Yeah, man, I don't get it. I don't get the modern art.
Deep thoughts about it, and I think for them it's less complicated than sometimes we make it. I think it becomes, what do you see? I see a
splotch of red paint.
Yeah. I see the brushstrokes. With music, What do you hear? I hear a melody that's buried under a barrage of heavy notes. Or this sounds like a storm. Or it sounds like a bird.
I think kids are more creative. We kind of, later on when they're older, we kind of kill their creativity and crush it out of them. But like when they're younger, they really have that capacity to really stretch out their mind and have different interpretations. That's really interesting. I have a question, Chris, about ear ability, like perfect pitch. Do you notice in your research with children, is perfect pitch a thing that comes up? Do kids have it, or are people aware of it? It's a rare phenomenon, but what's your experience with that? Do you have perfect pitch? I don't, by the way.
I do not either. We have perfect pitch and relative pitch.
Exactly. Working musicians have relative pitch. That's the one that you need. Yeah, but perfect pitch. Have you seen that crop up? You're working with a lot of kids in music, so I was wondering, what do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, Yes, I believe that a number of our children likely have it. We have not tested for it. I would kind of like to do that.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
That we likely have children that have some sense of it. And really, as I look at perfect pitch, it's just practice, and you're more malleable at that young age. So what I teach kids is, if you can develop a sense of C or do, if you can find do, and you can find it 9 times out of 10, then essentially you have perfect pitch, because you can relate anything to do. You can relate B or E to do. You can relate sol to do. So once you get one, you can get the rest. And I think
I knew Chris. I knew this guy in college, and he spent like 6 months trying to memorize A or something, and and like no, but he really tried like every day,
Yeah.
and at the end, like after 6 months, you're like, all right, man, give us an A, and I think he was off by like 2 semitones or
No.
something.
Yeah.
I don't hold much hope for adults, you know what I mean?
I've studied this a little bit, like tone deafness.
Yeah, tone deafness in music therapy, it's actually quite rare clinically. It's amusia, I think, or something like that.
Yes.
Where you hear noise instead of like tones, I think. But that's very rare, I think, clinically.
I don't think it's super rare. I don't know what the stats are. I think it's something.
You think it's a little bit more significant statistically?
I think so, like more like 1 out of 100 or something.
Really? Wow.
Ballpark. Yeah, when I was reading about it a few months ago, it was more frequent than I thought. My dad is always to have.
Yeah, your dad's a great guy.
But I think
what
really.
Go ahead.
It's all about. Well, this becomes a different conversation, but we talk about the word talent, and
right, a terrible word for music. Yeah.
Yeah, I think talent is really it's a physical word, and it applies, and as I understand it, it applies to a physical predisposition towards ability. So if you're 6'8", you probably are a talented basketball player because you're just taller than everybody. And the same thing with like playing the violin. If you got long fingers, most people don't have long fingers, so you're naturally predisposed to be a better violinist because that's what makes a better violinist. Now, hard work and all that is a whole nother thing, and I think personally, I think those two things go hand in hand. If you might be predisposed and you work hard, and that's what makes what we typically call a talented person. And I think the same applies in pitch. If some people have a natural disposition towards it, that there's a certain way that their body is set up, that their brains are wired to receive this information and interpret it. Some people, I don't recall the scientific term for them, but they see color.
What's that? Synesthesia? Scriabin had it. Alexander Scriabin. Synesthesia, I think. Something like that.
Yep. So that's obviously rare as well, but it's predisposition towards a way of seeing or hearing, interpreting something. But I think we're developing perfect pitch at this age because we are drilling consistent learning about pitch into children. I'd
love to see like you got to come back on the show and like maybe after some time where you can kind of do some controls and some tests, and I would love to see the results, see if it can be trained or if you indeed find out it's hereditary or it's random or rare. I'd love to know the data on that. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I hope to find it out.
I want to do a little sidetrack, Chris, onto a slightly different topic. It's still regarding music education. You went through a classical upbringing, and something that's always fascinated me is there's always been a kind of a disparity in classical education versus more contemporary or jazz education. Now, you've actually done both, so I think you're in a good position to comment on this. Why is it that classical music, there's an emphasis on reading, and which I think reading is very important, but there's an emphasis on reading and adherence to the score, and almost apprehension or a fear of notes outside of the score, or improvisation, or a certain kind of taking risks, so to speak?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that if you look at some of the great composers, they were great improvisers. And I think those things go hand in hand. If you can improvise, you can compose. And if you can compose, you can improvise. It's the same thing, just manifest in different physical ways.
When you were studying growing up, so wait, you said you didn't really like the lessons starting out, but when did you buckle down and start to really focus?
Maybe 10 or 11.
Okay, and in that, was it just before you met like Mark O'Connor and were introduced to the other styles, in those 5 years, was it a certain kind of way? Was it very typical in the sense that you're really learning difficult pieces, you're reading, and it's very traditionally classical in that sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was practicing from I think 12 or 13 years on, 12 or 13 years old onwards, I was practicing about 5 hours a day, and I'd practice scales for an hour. I'd practice etudes or exercises for an hour. I'd practice Bach for an hour, and then I'd
Yeah.
practice a concerto and maybe a sonata for another hour
Right.
each.
One thing about this show that one of the main reasons why I started the show is I'm very interested in changing the culture of music understanding as well, because I was really amazed when I did find out that, like you said, the great composers were improvisers, and suddenly in the last century it all changed. Nobody was improvising, nobody was composing, and in fact we put these composers on a pedestal and started playing their notes verbatim without any changing. And I'm wondering, since you have that now, tell me what was it like to suddenly begin to consider improvisation and different styles and play outside of that traditional mode of study that you used to do?
Well, I think for me it was a very simple answer. It was very freeing. Like one of the things I always was so maybe embarrassed about is I was practicing 5 hours a day, and I was good. um, but someone would ask me, one of my high school friends would ask me, "Hey, can you play me something?" And I would stop. Like, what can I play you? I mean, the concerto that I'm working on, I need an orchestra or a piano player. The sonata won't
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
I need the pianist. The
I
etudes.
guess you could play one of those caprices, right?
Yeah, there
But
are.
after a certain point, you run out of caprices.
Yeah, and I don't know. With classical music, you need to be at a certain level with a piece to be able to play it too.
Yeah.
And if you're going to play a concerto, you probably should have worked on that darn thing for 6 months. And I would get those questions, and I'd feel like a complete loser. I'd be like, I can't play anything.
No, that's the dreaded like happy birthday test, like when you have a kid who's been taking lessons for a long time, and then like he's at a party and somebody needs some music to happy birthday, and like you play it, you're a musician. And like, I don't know how to play happy birthday. And meanwhile that kid's like probably playing like a Beethoven piano sonata.
Oh, it's ridiculous. The just how impractical some of that stuff is. Like I can't even play Merry. I can't play Christmas carols, but I'm working on these incredibly difficult Bartok concertos.
That's what's always amazed me. It's because over here, if you want to get some kind of certificate, you need to play 3 songs. And to get to take that test, you actually don't really need to play any other music. You just need to do some kind of theory exam. And it's astounded me. You can get what is the equivalent of a black belt in music by just playing 3 songs, which is just quite unbelievable. I mean, granted, those songs are pretty difficult. They're probably like sonatas or something, but still, that's only 3 pieces of music. When I think now, with my understanding of music, a musician should know hundreds of songs, at least in your vocabulary. You have to know a lot of music. And I feel we're kind of shortchanging kids nowadays. We're making them practice really difficult pieces to kind of fool everyone on stage. But there's certain gaps in musicianship. And can you comment on that?
Well, I don't know if I have the same concern as you in that regard, but I feel that I look at it from job perspective.
Yeah, who's
But
gonna?
as a starving musician for a good part of my life, golly, what do you need to do to make enough money to buy lunch?
It's a little bit different, I think. In the United States, you guys don't have that exam culture, right? Like, did you ever have exams, so to speak, for music? I mean, you have auditions, but did you have like exams after a certain amount of lessons or so?
Well, in conservatory or at Berkeley, yeah. Um, I think in
That's
high
quite
school, no.
here. Like, we have exams for like we have like graded exams from like 1 to 8, and parents are like just like, how can I get the highest grade as fast as possible? That's what I like about America, because America, you guys, like, you can play or you can't play. That's it. That's it.
You got your freedom, huh?
Yeah. So actually, that's interesting. You used to run. Are you still in the the string quartet? I love that quartet that you had with Chen Lin, and it was a wonderful quartet. Do you still do some performances?
Well, I was out of the country for most of last year. So we did not play together since a residency down in Florida with the University of Florida back in
Now,
April this year.
actually, Naz, you have experience with actually doing a professional service where you actually get money. A lot of people don't realize that playing music is one thing, but to earn music by playing it is a completely different other ball game.
Yes.
And so, man, I wish time really flies. I wish I could keep you here longer, but let's just really quickly. What was that experience like, setting up a quartet and selling the service of providing music for functions and so forth?
Yeah, well, it was certainly difficult. In retrospect, I wouldn't do it again. I would focus on writing music and playing music and get a manager or a management team. But we didn't have any money back then, so that was not an option.
So you say career-wise, it would be better to compose and just go strike it alone.
Oh,
in a sense like make your own original music and promote that.
Well, let me say again. I think playing in an ensemble was great, and I imagined that was going to be my career, and I did make a career of that for about 6 years. But just the strain and difficulty of managing the band, setting up gigs, marketing it, and playing it, it eventually overwhelmed me, and has been something that I thought if I go back into that again, which I'm wanting to, I definitely want a team with me that's not playing and is handling the venue, handling the advertisements, and all that kind of stuff. Because
was the playing what was more of a concern? Was it the business side or the playing side?
Oh, the business side was always the hard part.
Yeah. Did you find what was the major revenue source for the quartet? Was it what certain types of functions, or what was popular and what earned the most money?
Well, we started the group in college to play weddings, and that's how we made most of our money for quite a while. And then we did transition. I think we did that solidly for about 4 years, and then we transitioned to be a professional touring group for about 6 years. And we did make more money touring, but that was a lot harder. And the money did come from ticket sales, of course, but we had to organize those concerts, market them ourselves. So that was pretty challenging. We never got quite to the level of having getting picked up by a major promoter.
Well, it's difficult, and look, you were distracted by this successful daycare, so what can you say?
We did have other things going on.
Well, Chris, listen, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on. I got to have you on more because, this show is about in-depth discussions about music, the only show where we really dive in deep, and I think you're an absolutely great guest. You bring so much value to the broadcast, and there's so many questions about early childhood music education because I want to change the culture. I know a lot of parents have a lot of these same questions when it comes to music and their children. Music lessons are always going to be popular. Music is such an important part to everyone's life, and I think it's fantastic that you're running a daycare that has music as a major theme. And if people are interested in checking out the Rock and Roll Daycare, where can they go? Yeah, well,
rockandrolldaycare.com. The and is spelled out A-N-D. And go to our website. We've got a great blog, an award-winning blog, and we also do a lot of ebooks. Our newest one is for non-musicians, what you can do at home to help your kid learn music. So you can download the ebook. You can get on our list and get a bunch of free content where I talk about some of the things we've been talking about today, and I'm sharing as I'm learning too. So it's an evolving process, and I'm wanting to share what I'm seeing in my own life as a father and as a educator here at Rock and Roll Daycare.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. Please come back soon again.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.
You've been listening to the Nikhil Hogan Show. Thank you so much for listening. There are shows 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Please hit subscribe to the podcast and leave a rating. I would really appreciate it. Also, stay tuned for my forthcoming book on music education. Announcements on that will be coming soon. Thank you again for listening. See you later.